My name is Erick Menendez. I am calling you from the Donovan Correctional Facility in San Diego, California. I am 51 years old.
My name is Lyle Menendez. I am 55 years old now.
First of all, you have directed an incredible documentary, one that's been very well received. What's your reaction been to the scale of the success of this production?
Well, I'm totally I'm surprised and I'm amazed. I can't believe, because I'm a director from Argentina, and even though I made some little successes before for Netflix, but mostly for Latin audiences in Spanish. And then when I received this invitation to do this documentary about such a big story in the US, the first I didn't believe that they were calling me, but then I did it. I had this opportunity, and then it was a global success. So it's surprising for me, for sure.
And you told me earlier, Alejandro, what was quite interesting is you didn't really know much about this story. You came in almost as an outsider, so you could start almost fresh. I mean, tell me how important that was to the process.
Well, as I told you, I was surprised when they invited me to direct this documentary, but then I understood that this was such a big story in the US and also such an old story. And there are like dozens of other documentaries made before and fictions also, that then I understood that probably the idea of calling me had to do with my fresh eyes. I'm not from the US, even though I lived for a small time in the 90s in the US. I heard about the case, but briefly. So probably my fresh eyes, the fact that I didn't know a lot about the story was good for telling the story today again.
For sure. And look, many are suggesting it has been profound in possibly giving the brothers a sort of second chance in the way it's sort of captured hearts and minds. How does that make you feel, that you've been a part of something potentially so impactful?
Well, for me, it's amazing, because it's the dream of every filmmaker, and especially documentary makers, to change reality in some way, that our films have some impact in reality. That's amazing. It's something you wish, you dream of, but normally it doesn't happen. But when they invited me to direct this documentary, I was sure of one thing, that we should have the brothers' voices. In all those other documentaries made before, in most of them, their voices weren't there, and especially they didn't have the voices of the two brothers, of Lyle and Erick. So for me, it was really important to have them, and having them was giving them also a new opportunity to explain their case 30 years later,
And that was really groundbreaking. I mean, you spoke to a number of stakeholders in this story, which was sort of brilliant for the production. But speaking to the two brothers whilst they're in prison, that's what really gave it its swing. I mean, what was it like speaking to these two brothers? How did it feel? Did you come away feeling a certain way about them? Did you learn anything new?
Talking to them was a real process, and a long process, because the first thing is that I couldn't go to the prison with a camera. The kind of sentence they have, it's so harsh that they have a lot of restrictions, so they can't be filmed, they cannot be recorded, they just can't talk through the telephone. Those telephones, as you see in the movies, they are in the prison, with a line of other inmates waiting for the phone. In small calls, small phone calls, they last like just 15 minutes. So we started a process where I received these calls, I talked to them, they called me again, and this lasted for months. which is very unusual in the way I normally do documentaries, because normally I go with the camera, I do an interview, a long interview, maybe 2 or 3 hours, and that's all. In this case, it was a whole relationship, that started and then lasted for a long, long time. So at the very beginning, it was very cold, let's say, because we weren't able to see each other. But then, through the weeks and through the months, it started to get more confident and more deep. So at the end, it was very compelling for me. It was something that in some way changed my mind. Maybe not about the case, but about, I learned a lot about the resilience of these men, being in jail for 30 years and still trying to live. So it was an amazing opportunity I had, really.
And that's really interesting that you say that, Alejandro. I mean, fundamentally at the core of this case is the opinion of sort of what the motivation were behind these killings. When these two boys killed their parents in 1989, was the intent for money, or was the intent to protect themselves from being killed themselves? The opinion for that is split. In your documentary, the prosecutor we mentioned, she says she believes their entire story is fabricated. I mean, where do you fall on this view? Having spoken to the brothers for so long and spent time creating this documentary, what is your opinion?
Well, I have a split opinion in some way too, but of course I don't think they did it for money. I don't think that, because they had the money. They already had the money, and I think they lived a very hard life. I don't believe everything they say. I'm not sure that they were in real fear that night. Probably they were living a very bad situation through the years, and they wanted it to stop. And of course, they wanted to protect themselves, but probably it was a lot of things, one over the other. But for sure, I believe they were abused and they lived a very bad life. I don't think it was for the money. I'm sure about that, and they are still saying the same things they said in the trial, 30 years ago. So I don't think with the sentence they have the necessity, or both brothers, to keep saying the same. So I believe them in some way. As I told you, I don't believe everything they said. I don't believe all their story in the way they tell it. I have some doubts. It's not that I don't believe, but I have some doubts. But I don't think it was for the money. I'm sure about that. I'm positive about that. And I also talked with a lot of relatives and people that knew them, and I arrived to that conclusion for sure.
Fair enough. And why do you think this story, your film, has captured the hearts and minds of so many people? What is it about this story that people have become so emotionally attached to and enthused by?
Well, for sure, it has to do with the sexual abuse, with the child sexual abuse. That is a story about, really, and also about what could happen inside a family. Inside the household. You could live in a neighborhood. You could have neighbors, and you see always the outside of what happens in a house. You're not allowed to get into the core of a house. And when people listen to this story, to this kind of stories, and especially what looks like or looked like a perfect family, with money, with everything you could wish, and then you understand what really happened, or what these brothers say that really happened inside that household. Your mind changes, and it blows your mind in some way, because that could be happening maybe next to you, and I think that's very compelling. That hooks the people a lot. And also listen to these grown men. They are more than 50 years old, both of them, and I think to listen those stories from their childhood, it's also very, very shocking. And I think people get hooked with this kind of stories. It makes you think about what could have happened to you, is happening, maybe very close to you.
And specifically, why do you think your piece of work has done so well? Because over the years, I mean, this has spanned over what, 3-4 decades. There's been all sorts of types of coverage. There's been books written. There's been articles, news. Why is it that your piece of work has been so profound and has done so well, do you think?
I think there are a couple of factors. The first one is that we have their voices, and that's very important. We never, in all these years, we never heard both brothers talking, about these things. And also I did, as I told you, a very long interview with both, very long interviews. So we really went deep in the story, and you feel that in the documentary, I think. But also we gave the space to the prosecutor and other people to talk against them, and you could balance, you could hear both voices, and I think that's very important. But the other very important factor has to do with what happened in the world. We as society, as a global society, we gave ourselves a space to talk about those issues, especially after the Me Too movement, after a lot of things that happened in our society in the last maybe 10 or 20 years. I think we have now the space to talk about those things more openly. And I think this documentary in this moment has a different meaning. It's meaningful. It's more meaningful in some way. Sure.
So, Alejandro, in some respects, time has worked in favor for these brothers, changing narratives, changing public opinion. But just how profound do you think the impact of social media has been here?
Well, it was very, very important for sure, and something very singular happened in 2020, which was that Court TV, the channel that televised the first trial, put the whole trial on YouTube. And a lot of people during the pandemics had the time to watch it, especially young people. And, they had a lot of free time, and they started watching the trial, and they had the opportunity to watch it, by themselves, to watch the trial and to arrive to their own conclusions. And that split it over the TikTok and other social networks. And that was a big phenomena. A lot of people asking what happened with these brothers. They knew about the brothers, young people, they knew this story about these brothers that killed their parents for money, but they didn't see the trial. When they saw the trial, they arrived to a different conclusion. So it was very important.
That's fascinating. And look, if we look at the difference between the sort of first trial and the second trial, I mean, it's night and day, and there's no denying, I mean, you allude to it in your documentary yourself, that politics had an impact here. Some people say, the public outrage from the acquittal of O.J. Simpson may have had an impact in sort of getting the second trial here done and dusted as quickly as possible. I mean, does all of this show a potential flaw in the American judicial system, in your opinion?
Well, justice is not necessarily fair. Justice is part of our society, and of course political issues have the influence in justice. I think it happens in every country. I wouldn't like to talk specifically about the American judicial system. I live in Argentina, so I don't want to say that, but for sure we should have this in account. In the US, I don't know how it works in the UK, but in my country, it's not the same way that in the US. In the US, the attorney office is an elective office. So it's a political thing around how how district attorney or the prosecutors work, for sure, because they should go for an election. Every X years, they should go for an election. So the district attorney in LA for sure needed some kind of win or something to show. And I think in some way, after our documentary happened something very similar, because after the documentary, the last district attorney in Los Angeles, I think it was in November 2024, he asked for a reopening of the case. And that was for sure very related with the fact that he was going for an election. So it's very normal, I think, that these kind of cases are used politically in some way. It's a shame, of course, but it happens.
Sure. And let's talk about the role of platforms like Netflix in, shining a light on things like this, or approaching different stories from a slightly different angle. How important do you think this medium has been in the process of changing the narrative in this story?
Well, it's very contradictory. Let's say what happens with the platforms and with documentaries with real cases. We should remember that these are real cases with real people involved, real people in jail, real people dead. And those are real dramas. And on the other hand, you have documentaries that go to platforms and that are watched by millions, hopefully. That's what happened in my case. And sometimes they are just, show business, just part of the entertaining industry. And sometimes you can say something. It depends on you, on the director, on the production company, on your ethics. So in our case, we tried to be as faithful as we can. We tried to be very honest with our audience, but also with our interviewees, to tell them what we wanted to do. And of course, in my personal case, I have for me, it's very important that justice is made, and especially to show our audiences these kind of stories for people to learn, to learn about child abuse, about the judicial system, to try to make the world better. But at the same time, you're part of the show business, and sometimes it's just, shows. So it's very hard. But in my case, it was important because 40 million people or more had the opportunity to watch this story and to learn about child abuse. And for me, that's the goal, and that's very important.
Alejandro, ultimately, there's still quite a long way to go before we get a sort of major update for the brothers. I mean, there's a few legal avenues being explored, whether it's clemency from the governor, whether there is a retrial, a resentencing rather, given to them. I mean, what do you ultimately want to see? In an ideal world, what do you want to see happen?
I would love to see them walking through the streets freely. I think they made a horrible murder. I don't think they are innocent people, and they don't think it too. They told me that. But I think that 30 years of jail, of prison, is enough for the killing. I don't think they are a danger for society anymore. They have learned a lot and they had thought a lot. But the most important thing for me, beyond their fate, the brothers' fate, has to do with people learning and getting enlightened about their story. Their story should enlighten people about child sexual abuse and these things that happen in families, and they're still happening. And that's the most important thing for me.
Well, I feel, Alejandro, just from the numbers that you've mentioned, but just from the reach and the impact of your documentary, it certainly feels as though that has been achieved. So again, congratulations to you for a fantastic job. Alejandro Hartmann, thank you very much indeed for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.